jump to the commerce power. The commerce power is found in Article 1, Section 8. And the commerce power is something that has been massively distorted over time. But, it had a very plain meaning. It's right here at the bottom of page 19. 4 lines from the bottom. The Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So really it means the Congress shall, to shorten it, it's the Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states. Okay, that doesn't sound like such a grand power. How are we going to, okay, they regulate commerce. Well, as it was originally understood, that meant regulating waterways, offering licenses to the coasting trade, that is to licenses that would allow you to trade along the coastline of the United States, regulating navigable waterways perhaps, regulating conditions of moving products from one state to another state. And it also, there's another provision that denies states, also found in Article 1, denying states the rights to impose imposts or duties on products. This was an important part of the Congress. This is what the Confederation Congress was most concerned about. They didn't want these trade wars to continue between the states. So this power to regulate commerce and the stopping of duties between the states was simply that. We're going to have free flow of commerce between the states, and Congress is going to impose any regulations only on products moving across state lines or upon the channels of interstate commerce. Well, that's how it was understood, and that's pretty much what the commerce power meant throughout most of its history. But then things changed in the 1930s, and we suddenly saw a transformation under Franklin Delano Roosevelt of what the commerce power would mean. And there are a couple of cases that epitomize what was going on. The first case was Schechter Poultry Company versus the United States. Schechter Poultry versus the United States, and that was in 1935. And that involved the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, which gave the president the authority to create codes of fair competition for certain industries. And of course, this was at the Depression had already begun. The stock market crash of '29 had already occurred. And so these were all these programs, these alphabet soup programs that the Roosevelt administration put together. FDR called that particular bill, quote, the most important and far-reaching legislation ever enacted by the American Congress. And it gave the federal government an ability to set wages and guarantee a certain minimum wage. It also allowed the federal government to establish maximum hours for each industry and to delineate unfair trading practices, to set prices for each industry. Now, there were supposed to be associations that would come together and bargain these, negotiate these prices and wages, and then the federal government would take the negotiated prices and enforce them upon the country. Well, there was a flurry of activity. But then some people started chafing under it. They said, wait a minute, how can the federal government do this? How can the federal government tell me what price I can sell my product at? And tell me how much I can pay somebody to work for me, or how much I must pay somebody to work for me. And finally, the case of Mr. Schechter comes to the Supreme Court. And Mr. Schechter owned a poultry slaughterhouse, and he purchased, he was in New York City. This was back when New York City actually had slaughterhouses in it, and all of which, some of which are actually the buildings, the husks of the buildings are still there, except they've been converted to fashionable nightclubs and shows with fancy, or shops with fancy, expensive clothing in them. But the slaughterhouses that the Schechter operated, he bought his chickens from New York State producers, growers, farmers, and he slaughtered them, and he sold the chicken meat only to retailers in New York. And so he said, my products never move across the state line. How can the federal government possibly tell me that I have to pay a certain wage or have certain maximum hours? And he won. The Supreme Court struck it down. The Supreme Court said, yeah, that's not interstate commerce. Congress can't regulate that. And so that was the first step where the court was saying, no, the Congress has gone over the power of the commerce, gone over the line of the commerce power. Well, the next big case was Carter versus Carter Coal. And in Carter versus Carter Coal, this was 1936. This was the Bituminous Coal Conservation Act of 1935. Similar deal, except for the coal industry. It would set prices, wages, working conditions. The federal government says, we're going to regulate this big industry, really big, important industry, and we're going to set all of these conditions in the workplace. Again, Supreme Court strikes it down by a vote of 6-3. Now, at this point, the Roosevelt administration starts thinking, okay, we've got a problem here with the Supreme Court. They're actually enforcing this Article 1 limits, and they're actually forcing us to look on this list and show that what we are doing is actually on the list, and they don't buy our rationale. And the government was trying to defend these arguments, these cases, saying, well, we affect commerce. If you regulate the wages and you limit them, or you guarantee a floor and you limit the prices, or actually what they were doing was pushing prices up, set minimum prices, you will affect the amount of goods that move across interstate lines. But the Supreme Court said, no, that's not regulating commerce. You're regulating manufacturing. You're regulating wages and hours, which has an effect on interstate commerce, but that's not regulating interstate commerce. You can only regulate the movement of products across the state line. And so we had the court packing plan, right? And the court packing plan, you all remember. In March of 1937, Roosevelt says in his fireside chat, he says the Supreme Court is not acquainted with what is going on in the Dust Bowl. The Supreme Court is not acquainted with the plight of the American worker. It says if the Supreme Court will not allow us to deal with it, then we must change the Supreme Court. And so he comes up with this plan to turn a court of 9 justices into a court of 15 justices. And the theory was that every justice over the age of 70 would be immediately, who didn't choose to retire, a new justice would be added to sit beside that justice, in essence. And there would happen to be 6 justices over the age of 70, and so that would give Roosevelt 6 new appointees right away. And you can do the math here. All of a sudden, the 6-3 decisions would be a 9-6 decision, and Roosevelt would get his way. And his theory was the court, they're too old. Once you reach the age of 70, you're not able to, so Roosevelt's administration argued, you're not going to be able to write as many opinions, you're not going to be able to be as effective as a judge, and so we therefore have to quit. It was a sham, of course. That he wanted to just pack the court and get more justice on the court. But it scared the justices. And that and so we come to what is called the switch in time, where the court packing plan actually caused some of the justices who were in that 6-justice majority, 2 of them, to actually change their minds and give in and say, okay, we give. We're going to go ahead and revise our view of the commerce power. And thus it was called the switch in time that saved 9. A play on the stitch in time, of course, right? Because they switched, and then they were willing to go. Then the 9 justices were kept. And so the committee never got. Once the court did that, well, it was already rumbling around in the committee. But about the same time that it was in the committee in the Congress, the switch occurred, and then Congress didn't need to move forward. So go ahead.
Could that be distilled down to one word, extortion?
Yeah, or extortion, or threat, or saying it's inevitable, we're going to win anyway, because if you don't change, we're going to change you. It didn't take away the jobs from the sitting justices, but it became clear that if Roosevelt got that plan through, that the executive was going to run over them no matter what. Again,
wasn't the 9 decided by the Constitution?
Actually, good question. The Constitution does not define how many justices will be on the Supreme Court. Congress is allowed to define the justices. So actually, if next year Congress wanted to say, we think there need to be 11 justices, Congress could. And there have been some interesting periods in American history, specifically right after that's a scary thought. Right? But there has for the last 100 years been sort of a consensus, well, ever since the death of the court packing plan, the consensus, so 80 years, a consensus that this is something we should disrupt because there's too much mischief that comes with creating. Like, for example, during the Johnson administration, right after the Civil War, there was a vacancy on the court, and the Reconstruction Congress did not want to give Johnson, a Democrat, the power to appoint to the vacancy. And so the Reconstruction Congress passed a law governing the size of the court that said, we shall keep the number, we shall not fill this vacancy, and we will keep the number at 9. And so that was all designed to keep Johnson from getting it. So in theory, if there were a Republican Congress today and they really wanted to be bold, which they wouldn't do, they would tell President Obama that no, you can't fill this. We'll have an 8-member court. There have been even numbers too.